Good morning, folks. Nice to practice with you. Those who don't know me, my name is Michael. We have a larger group this morning and last night, and I know some of you are here for the retreat, for the weekend part of the retreat, and others are here for the full 5-day retreat. And our teachers had asked me to speak yesterday afternoon, so I gave the Dhamma talk then, and I apologize for taking up the airspace again this morning, but we wanted to clarify something that came up last night in our question and answer period, and because it's something that touches everybody at some point, and that's grief. And I'll just sort of explain how it came up and why, and there's. I want to just sort of clarify some things about what we spoke about last night. So one of the practitioners asked, can this practice help with grief? And the practitioner said specifically, I lost somebody a couple of years ago, and I had a lot of grief in the beginning, but I feel like maybe I shut it down and there's more there that I need to experience, more or less. I think that's what they said. And Tavivat said, this practice can help with grief. I believe it can. And he told a story about a woman named Anjali, not our Anjali, but an Anjali in Thailand, who was a disciple of Luang Tien's and who reached the end of the path. And he recounted a time when he was with Anjali, and Anjali had, who did Anjali lose at that time? Tavibat? Who did she lose? Anjali.
Her parents.
Both of her parents at the same time? Yeah.
In a car accident.
So yes, she lost both of her parents in a car accident. And she told Tavivat, but I feel, I'm surprised that I feel calm. I'm not as tore up as I would be normally. And she was surprised by that she didn't have the same intense sort of reaction that she would have normally in the past. And so as soon as Tavi told that story, part of me was like kind of cringing inside because it opens up this whole thing. It sounds kind of pathological to the Western mind. I'm a psychologist, by the way, so I'm acutely aware of how pathological that all sounds, right? And I told the story, also that when Ajahn Da's mother died, years ago, and he was here at the center, and I had come to the center, and I said, Ajahn, sorry about your mom. And he was getting ready to fly back to Thailand to bury her, cremate her. And he said, it's okay, it's just nature. And which is very different than like a normal person's reaction. And again, I'm acutely aware of how pathological that sounds. And I just want to sort of make it clear that Anjali's experience, Ajahn Da's experience, is referring to somebody who has come to the end of the path. And there is an end. It gets glossed over in modern Buddhism, particularly here in the West. But if you read the suttas, it is everywhere. The Buddha is always talking about arahantship. People are reaching arahantship, reaching the end, putting an end to all suffering. So it is clearly, part of the Buddhist. It's the center of the Buddhist teaching, and many teachers, particularly in this country, have kind of said, don't worry about that. That's for another lifetime. Awakening's for another lifetime. Just practice. And, and one of the things that, kind of really made me, convinced me of the genuineness of this path is that they didn't do that. They said, yeah, it's real. And you can do it. Everybody can to know the end that the Buddha has experienced himself and then help others experience. And at that end, there's, we walk the path, but then the mind, at the end, the mind changes in a fundamental way. It changes in a very fundamental way. And in Zen, they call it the great death, dying the great death. And Luang Tian, when he was enlightened, said, I've died and been born again. There's this fundamental change that happens in the mind. And it doesn't, you can't really imagine what that is like. It's something you need to experience yourself. And because even the word nibbana means extinguishing. The fire is completely out. The embers are completely out. You can't blow on the embers and get them to come back to life again. It's gone, can't come back. And even that, it doesn't sound very enticing to the Western mind, right? And part of what made this all kind of, there's another piece of the conversation we kind of had to cut off because we just have gone too long, and you just kind of think about how to talk about this. But one of the other practitioners said, kind of objected to the whole idea that not feeling grief is some sign of spiritual attainment, that it's that we're human beings, we have hearts. She said very eloquently and beautifully, and true. We're human beings, we have hearts. Our hearts get broken. We should, we should allow them to be broken. And for while we're on the path, that is absolutely right. We shouldn't try to run away from our pain, right, or pretend like it's not there. So I'm very grateful that she expressed that, because I'm sure there were other people in the room harboring the same kind of, wait a minute, So when Tabirat was speaking about Anjali or Shanda's experience, it's the experience of somebody who that fundamental change has happened, and you can't imagine what that's like. You'll try to, and you'll say, well, that sounds messed up, but it's not. You don't really know what it's like until you experience it, and it's not that you no longer care. It's just your heart doesn't. You don't suffer anymore. You care, but you don't suffer. I think the best way to understand it is that all dukkha is personalized. Comes from the mind personalizing things. Grief, especially. There's nothing more personal than grief. And part of the conversation last night, I shared, my parents died, years ago when I was a young adult, and I talked about how I used practice to kind of help me navigate that process. And then Frank shared, was it your brother-in-law?
My brother.
Your brother died overseas in a kind of violent way, I think. Right? And the pain associated with that. But when we didn't know each other when either of those deaths happened. I didn't know Frank yet when my mother died. But if I had known him, he wouldn't have grieved. about my mother, he would have presumably said, "Oh, I hope express this empathy for me and say, "Oh, if anything I can do, I hope you're okay." Maybe would have worried about me, but the grief is my grief because it's my mother, and his brother dying is his grief because it's his brother, not my brother. I would have been concerned for Frank and cared, but I wouldn't have been grieving, and all dukkha is like that, And part of it, when some point of the day, Frank shared the story of um, driving. We have been talking about how it's unintentional thought and is what enables dukkha. And Frank told a story about going to the market and somebody was driving really slow in front of him and he found himself getting angry that this person was impeding him from getting done what he had to be done, which we all can relate to, that's what the mind does. But it's personalized, right? This person is getting in my way, and taking me from doing what I got to do. How dare they? So all of our dukkha is personalized. And when that fundamental change happens at the end, the mind just by itself stops personalizing anything. It just stops personalizing it. And again, it doesn't mean you don't care, but it's, like Ashana said, it's nature to die, it's part of it's everybody's nature to die. And of course he knows it's his mother, but he doesn't, it's not personalized in the same way. And I don't like talking about it because it's so easy to see that, to hear it as we're saying, we're suggesting that you shouldn't feel what you feel. It means you're not practicing hard enough if you're feeling grief or pain or anger, and that's not the case. On the path, we need to just to be aware with mindfulness of what is happening in the heart and mind and the body. To be aware with mindfulness means to have no greed or aversion towards what we're being aware of. So if we have pain or an angry reaction or a sad reaction, we're not fearful of that reaction. We just see it and know it, as it is. And that's how we progress along the path. So it's never about shutting things out or shutting things down. But this is going to come up again if people have practiced it for a while. That there is, because in this tradition we acknowledge that there is this end state that is knowable, and yeah, it's when I was writing my book. I did the writing and then I give it to a person to kind of help with the editing to just kind of make sure it was clear and everything. And there is a section, I was talking about just this, like I said, there is this end, that's there. And that's for those who are interested in the deeper practice of the Dhamma. That end is part of the deeper practice of the Dhamma. And that there is this end where all suffering stops, or something like that. And the guy who was editing he asked me, he's also a practitioner. He asked me, well, does that now you're saying that there's no more emotional suffering either? And because he was trying to say that I'm reading this and it's not quite clear. I'm not sure if you're saying that there's no more emotional suffering. And I said to him, I said, well, yes, at the end of the path, at that point, there is no more emotional suffering because you stop personalizing anything. The mind just doesn't do that anymore. And but I don't want to change the way I wrote it because I want it to be. I'd rather it be ambiguous. Because if I say that clearly, people are going to misunderstand it. They're going to have a reaction to it. It's going to be an obstacle, and so it's kind of a fraught topic, right? And in terms of, the end is there for people who set their sights on it and practice for it, towards it. But in the meantime, there's space between now and then, probably for most of you. Our practice can help with grief, I think, right? For one thing, it should make us less avoidant, less fearful of our own feelings and reactions and thoughts. And it can help us, you can see the relationship between thought, between thinking and the way grief is being experienced. So, I use the case, which is much earlier in my meditation career, of when my mother died. That kind of a loss is really kind of, people that close to you, like your parents or your partner or your child, are part of they're almost like part of your identity in the world, right? So when that gets stripped away, I think as a psychologist, there is a certain amount of processing that has to happen. Like what am I now, and so as a psychologist, I think there is some of that processing. That processing has to happen, right? But you don't have to do it 24/7, this is the phrase last night, like a dog on a bone, which is what can happen. You can just be going over and over and over and over, and that's not helpful, I don't think. So at that time, I use my practice to see the mind just keeps going with it. I just keep coming out of it. I give it some space, or think about it, but then I'd come out of it, back to the here and now, and set it down for a while. And we can also see how we're thinking about the person. There was I have a friend who's a Buddhist teacher. He was a monk in Thailand for a short time. Then he was a monk for many years under Ajahn Sumedho in England. And then he disrobed, got married, but still was very involved with Ajahn Sumedho and on the board. So he's a serious practitioner and teacher. And his wife died a couple years ago, and he teaches some people from Wenham, Melham, John Stevens, and so he still comes by once a year and teaches because he has a connection to the area. And somebody asked him, like, how do you deal with that, with losing your wife? And he says, well, I see that I can think about how terrible it is she's not here, and make myself miserable, or I can think about how wonderful it was that I had those years with her, and be grateful for the time, those moments that we had with each other. So the type of thought that you take up sort of defines your emotional reaction. And it's up to you. There's no right or wrong. I think the one wrong would be to do what I think that practitioner last night was kind of warning against is to shut it off. And because some people say, I'm not going to think about that person anymore because it's too painful to think about them, and I'm not even going to think about them. And I don't think that's right. I think you have the memory of that person, but when the memory of that person comes up, you then start going about, oh my gosh, they're not here anymore. This is so terrible. Or you just say, oh, she was such a wonderful person, and we had that time together, and it's great to have had that time with her. I just lost my best friend in Massachusetts. And I mean, to be honest, it didn't affect me either the same way maybe it would have. It's not as close a loss as a partner or something, but we were very close. He was my best friend. And it's not that he didn't care. I definitely cared. I was with him. He had ALS. He was a very awful death. I visited him frequently. Um, and, um, and, you know, I, if a thought, I don't avoid memories of him. Memories come up, but I don't, when memories come up, I say, oh, he was such a wonderful person, and we were close, and we were able to do these things together. I could very easily start thinking about, how I can't do the things I used to do with him anymore. He's gone, and just go down a hole, But there's no, I don't believe, even as a psychologist, that there's anything to gain by going down a hole. Um, I think again, it's just about don't avoid it. Because that I don't think is right. But so anyway, let me stop there. And does that? I don't know if that helps or makes it murkier. Or
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was so filled with that noise because I think it's so easy for us to compare ourselves and say, oh, I have to have that, or I have to be like that. If you're not at that stage, then I think it's very dangerous. And I think the Buddha knew that, and there is a story about this woman who lost a baby and lost everything in her life and was so unconsolable. And she said, she brought the dead baby to the Buddha and said, please, you can do anything, make my child live again. And the Buddha did not say, oh, you should grieve, but he said, I can do that for you. If you bring me a mustard seed from a home where no one has died. And so she took her dead baby to all these homes. And she met other people, and all these other people had gone through this same experience. And so the lesson to me is not get with it, death happens to everyone. The teaching is about we share, we're not alone, we're all in this boat together. And to be compassionate to one's own life, or to be compassionate to another person's life.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Frank. I love that sutta because it, like as you're suggesting, he didn't say when this person came forward, he didn't say, oh, you shouldn't grieve, or he didn't say, oh, you shouldn't take it personal, but he gave her sort of a practice to do that enabled her to kind of arrive at that place of not taking it, because that was kind of the what she got out of it. At the end of it, it's not personal. It's everybody's. This happens to everybody, and we get stuck in grief when we over personalize it. And he didn't like to your point. He didn't tell her you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be grieving. Oh, just don't take it so personal. He helped her experience that for herself. And that's what. Anybody that comes in here with a loss, we're never going to say, "Oh, don't worry about it," or "Get over it," or "Don't take it personal," because it's painful. And we acknowledge that, and our, the practice. You kind of learn for yourself to not take things as personal, or to personalize things, kind of in a natural, organic way. Our practice. It doesn't. leave you suppressing or cutting things off, or not caring, but just allows you to put the dukkha down. Still care, but put the dukkha down.
I just keep thinking about the idea that suffering comes from when we think that things should be different than they are in the present moment. And I think with grief especially, there's a lot of like, oh, I should be grieving this way, or I should be feeling this, or I shouldn't be feeling this, I think in our culture especially. I definitely, the times that I've lost family members have sort of looked around at how other people were grieving and thought there was something wrong with the way I was doing it, because, I don't know, I guess I've never lost someone super close to me where I felt like I had to change my identity, and so I would see, like, my sister is an especially dramatic griever, and, that's her way of doing things, but I always thought, oh, I should be feeling that, or there's something wrong. And the conversation last night, that's what I thought of as well, like, this sense of this should be different than it is where we run into all of our problems. And so, yeah, maybe you're not feeling sad or mourning a person or missing a person on a given day or in a given moment, and then maybe another day you are, and just to learn to be present with whatever that is in that moment, seems a reasonable way.
Yeah, good. Thank you, somebody. Yeah. Anything else? How many people are here? Well, how many people are here just for the morning? Not for the two? Welcome, of course. We're going to have lunch soon, and we have plenty of food, delicious Thai food. So feel free to join us for lunch. We're going to be eating in silence. This is a silent retreat. So if you're okay with that, and you like Thai food, then join us. Yeah, and looking forward to practicing with you, for those of you who are staying in the next couple of days.